Before I start out this video, I want to issue you all a warning. This video contains a lot of spoilers, not just for the base game of Elden Ring, but also major spoilers for the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. So please, if you haven't played Shadow of the Erdtree yet, and you don't want it to get spoiled, then stop this video right now and go play the DLC and then come back. You've been warned. One other thing worth noting is that this video is part 3 of a 3-part Elden Ring boss ranking. I'll link parts 1 and 2 in the description down below. And as mentioned in the previous video, this video is going to be focusing on the top 10 bosses in Elden Ring in my opinion. And so there's bound to be at least one person watching this video who disagrees with at least one of my picks, and you know what? That's completely fine. My opinion is not fact, you are free to disagree. Anyway, let's start out part 3 with number 10. Along with being the first on this list in today's video, this is also the first boss with a cutscene, and it only appears after defeating Radagon, who appeared to be the true final boss of the game. Need I say more after that cutscene? That cutscene just perfectly summarizes the whole atmosphere of this fight for me. I know the general consensus on the Elden Beast is a little mixed, or at least it used to be, but for me, I think that this boss was the perfect way to end off this absolute masterpiece of a game. And really, I don't think they could have picked anything else more fitting as a final boss, as instead of fighting some random character, we are literally fighting against the living manifestation of the Elden Ring itself. Everything about the fight perfectly sells the idea that this is the end of your journey, the final battle in the entire game, and I just love everything about this fight's atmosphere, as well as the arena and the design of the Elden Beast itself. The Elden Beast's moveset, too, is perfect for a final boss of the game. The attacks the Elden Beast has with its sword have quite a long reach and are delayed just enough to prevent spam rolling. It's a very mobile creature and will very often swim and jump throughout the entire arena and will literally fly in the air. It can spray some sort of golden fire at you, which you have to watch out for, and it prevents you from abusing its size too much because it'll spray it in between its legs as well. It's also able to send a rain of golden projectiles up into the air, which then come back down following the player, which you have to run away from. On top of this, it can fly up into the air and summon rings that close in on the player before exploding, which you have to jump over either on foot or with Torrent. It can shoot beams of gold out of its sword. It can use nebula attacks which explode after a few seconds, similar to Estelle. It's able to jab you with its sword. It can fly up off the ground before slicing its sword before landing. And you get the whole idea behind its moveset. It's got a very versatile and dangerous moveset that you have to be good enough to learn. There is one attack that most people don't really know how to avoid from the Elden Beast, known as the Elden Stars spell. And I will admit, I didn't really know how to avoid it for quite a while myself. However, I've recently found a way to successfully avoid it. Pretty much what you have to do is dodge into the attack and then keep running in the same direction before repeating the process, because it takes a while to be able to fully turn around. The Elden Beast's attacks are very finely tuned to be a final test of your skill with the game. However, the moveset isn't the only thing that makes this fight difficult, nor is it how much the boss moves around. The main difficulty with this fight, in my opinion, comes from the endurance you have to be able to win. You are only able to access this boss after beating Radagon, and all the resources you've consumed during that fight will not be here for the fight against the Elden Beast. And if you die against the Elden Beast, then you go all the way back to having to kill Radagon again. This means you'll probably have about half the amount of flasks you normally would if you're like me, and you'll also have the risk of having to fight the previous boss again if you die. At first I really hated this, but after a while I've mellowed out towards this aspect of the fight a lot. And let me tell you, landing the final hit on the Elden Beast is always just extremely satisfying. Seriously, that feeling has never gone away. On my first couple of playthroughs, I used to absolutely hate the Elden Beast, but now after having gotten over 500 hours in Elden Ring as a game, and along with that, after just getting better at the game, I've come to appreciate this fight a lot more. It's a boss that's aged beautifully with time, and it's just the perfect end to this game in my opinion. The Elden Beast is easily among the best final bosses ever put in a From Software game, and for being such a beautifully fitting end to Elden Ring, I decided to put it at number 10. Number 9, Dragon Lord Placidusax. Placidusax is a boss of the final legacy dungeon of the main game of Elden Ring, Crumbling Fair Missoula, and he's also a hidden boss, so he's very easy to miss. Placidusax used to be the best dragon boss in Elden Ring, and the second best dragon boss in the Soul series, period, second only to Dark Eater Midir. But then Shadow of the Erdtree dropped, and one boss that I won't name for right now ended up taking both Placidusax's crown and also Midir's crown as my favorite dragon fight from each respective property, but I'll get to that later. Before I begin praising the boss though, I've gotta confess to something. I don't really like this fight as much as I used to. Don't get me wrong, Dragon Lord Placidusax is still an incredible boss fight, but its flaws have definitely started to show over time. But anyway, let's talk about one positive thing about the fight that's probably very obvious right now, that being the spectacle of the fight. First off, Dragon Lord Placidusax looks incredible, and I just love the whole combo of a Hydra and a dragon with the design. It almost sort of reminds me of the Gleeok from the Legend of Zelda series. While the music is a little forgettable, it's still beautifully fitting, and along with that, the arena is absolutely stunning, seriously. This remains probably my single favorite looking arena in the entire game, even after the DLC, and that says a lot. The presentation isn't the only thing that makes this fight so amazing, though. The gameplay here is absolutely spot on. Placidusax's moveset for the most part is really good in my opinion. He's got red lightning swipes with his claws, he's able to breathe golden fire out of his two heads, he can swipe his tail and all that kind of stuff. He's also able to jump slightly around the arena and change his position. The best strategy here is to try and use his size to your advantage by hugging his side and leaving whenever he starts breathing fire towards his side or jumps around. Another attack he has is an attack where he summons red lightning to strike the ground, which works in a very similar way to Lich Dragon Fortisax's Deathblight Lightning. Placidusax also has one of the coolest AoE attacks in the entire game, where he summons a giant bolt of red lightning and the music goes briefly quiet, and then the lightning explodes in a giant nuke. I don't really have any complaints about any of Placidusax's attacks. All of the hitboxes work incredibly well, and while the attacks have quite a large range to them, they all give you ample time to be able to avoid them. What I do find a little disappointing though is the fact that Placidusax, aside from his move where he hops around, barely even moves throughout the fight. In fact, if he never does his hop attack, he'll basically stay completely still for the entirety of Phase 1. Although Phase 2 changes this up slightly, and well, the transition into Phase 2 doesn't have a cutscene, but it's really cool. Just take a look. Yeah, in Phase 2, Placidusax gains the ability to teleport around, and he opens up Phase 2 with his new signature attack where he turns invisible before transforming into a bunch of clouds that follow after the player. Then after a little bit, he emerges from those clouds and does a dive towards the player with his claw outreached. This attack can not only be very dangerous, but it's also just awesome in my opinion. Placidusax's teleportation abilities that he gains in Phase 2 helps make the fight a bit more unpredictable, but besides that, he maintains most of his previous attacks. He's got all the usual stuff as well, but also the not-so-usual Death Laser in the form of Placidusax's Ruin. And also, just like last video, the footage I had of this attack is mysteriously gone for some reason. Seriously, I am starting to kind of hate Google Drive. Overall, these new moves that were added are incredible, but I've gotta be honest, I wish they expanded on Phase 2 a little bit more. But even though Placidusax may not have aged the best, overall he's still an incredible boss fight and I absolutely love him, and so I put him at number 9. Okay, so this next boss is sort of an established character within the game that the character we play as has a direct relationship to. He first adopts the alter ego of Margit the Fell Omen and creates an illusion of himself to fight us outside Stormveil Castle, and then later on in the Altus Plateau. And then, right at the halfway mark of the game, at the very end of Leyndell, the royal capital, we finally get to face off against the man himself.
Graceless, tarnished. What is thy business with these thrones? Ah, Godric the Golden. The twin prodigies, Mikola and Melania. General Radahn. Praetor Rykard. Luna Princess Rani. Willful traitors, all. Thy kind are all of a piece. Pillagers, emboldened by the flame of ambition. Have it writ upon thy meager grave. felled by King Morgoth, last of all kings.
Yep, we've got the Veiled Monarch himself, Morgoth the Omen King. As soon as I heard from Gideon Ofnir at the Round Table Hold about Morgoth the Omen King and realized the similarity between Morgoth and Margit, I knew that Morgoth was likely going to be the true man behind the Margit alter ego. What I didn't expect, though, was that I would actually start to feel genuinely sorry for Morgoth in a way that I don't really feel for most other characters. Morgoth isn't just some cruel tyrant hell-bent on destroying us. Morgoth is instead the unwanted child of Queen Marika, the child who was born with the Omen curse, the child who was chained and shackled up inside the sewers for his entire childhood, the child that, despite never being loved by any of his family members at all, still devoted himself to fighting for the Golden Order, the exact order which rejected him in the first place. Morgoth has some of the best lore out of any boss in the main game, and along with that, he's also got some of the best gameplay out of any boss in the main game. This isn't some sort of botched reskin of Margit the Fell Omen. Oh no, Morgoth the Omen King is a true rematch. Morgoth has a lot of the same attacks with his hammer and such from the Margit fights, however his staff has now been replaced with a massive curved blade. This not only adds to the threat of a lot of his swings, because now he's actually hitting you with a blade instead of a blunt object, but along with that it also adds a lot to his speed and agility. He is a lot faster and more agile in this fight, and there's much less of a delay to a lot of his moves. Along with this, a lot of his attacks from the Margit fight are either modified or completely replaced. For example, when he throws his golden daggers, now he throws 3 of them out instead of just 1. He's also able to flip and glide around the arena as well, and not just that either. He gains a new combo with his golden longsword where he basically becomes a Beyblade, which is awesome. And to top it all off, he also gains the ability to create a massive golden spear which he can either charge at you with or throw at you. All of these attacks are very dangerous, and the Beyblade combo in particular is massively deadly. He can also create a bunch of golden daggers in the sky that then fall down to the ground, which makes you have to be careful of your positioning. And once you add on his absolutely insane levels of aggression during this fight compared to his earlier fights with Margit, and you have a fight that feels like a true rematch and a really fast-paced skill check. The hitboxes to all of his attacks are perfectly designed, and if you dodge at the correct timing, you'll basically be all good with enough time to recover your stamina or maybe get a quick heal in. Morgoth's also got plenty of punish windows as well, so it's not like you don't get a chance to fight back. You've basically got to balance being defensive with not being passive, and I really like that. It results in a really tense and thrilling experience that gets my adrenaline pumping every time I fight this boss. Then there's of course his second phase transition, which is one of my favorite instances of boss fights being used for storytelling in Elden Ring. Roll the clip.
Shall not be forgiven.
When we wound Morgoth, his blood erupts out of him all over the arena and stains the thrones of his demigod siblings as well as his own throne. The entirety of the Golden Order viewed Omen blood as being cursed, something to be reviled, and now we've spilled it all over the throne room of the Elden Lord. In Morgoth's eyes, we've basically tainted the holiest ground in the entirety of the lands between, and the fact that it was his blood, that he was sort of the one to also taint it as well with his own blood. It brings him so much pain. You can hear it in Morgoth's voice too, seriously. Anthony Howell did an incredible job voicing this character. He is just awesome. Morgoth becomes even more aggressive in Phase 2, and along with that, his blood is able to erupt in pools around the arena. On top of this as well, his sword is now buffed up with the power of his own blood, and he can use cursed blood flame incantations with a lot of his attacks. The blood flame incantations basically add an after effect of fire to the attacks they're used on, which is a nice way of ensuring that you have some good dodge timing. Otherwise, your strategy remains just about the same. And after you beat Morgoth, you can find his dying body in the arena and talk with it, and his dialogue is just sad.
The Erd Tree wards off all who deign approach. We are all forsaken. None may claim the title of Elden Lord. Thy deeds shall be met with failure, just as I.
Morgoth is among the most tragic characters in all of Elden Ring, and the scene where his father Godfrey finally returns to the Lands Between only to have to hold his dying corpse was genuinely heartbreaking. And for just overall being a boss with incredible lore, some great presentation, and some great build-up, as well as some truly outstanding gameplay, Morgoth has earned his title as being the number 8 spot on this list.
Dearest Mikola, you must abide alone a while. Welcome, honored guest, to the birthplace of our dynasty.
And right here at number 7, we've got Mohg the Lord of Blood. Mohg is probably the best of all the Shardbearer boss fights in the game, and along with that is probably the trickiest one to access. In order to be able to access Mohg and take him on, you either have to follow Vare's questline, or find the Waygate in the Consecrated Snowfield, which is itself a secret open world region, that then takes you to Mohgwyn Palace. I will admit, I'm not really a big fan of Mohgwyn Palace, but Mohg himself is still a fantastic boss. Mohg used to be considered a bit of a meme character in the Elden Ring community and would often be referred to as the Mohg Lester, but then the DLC came out and then it was revealed that actually no, he was the one getting Mika-lested instead. But even after the DLC came out, Mohg's fight has aged surprisingly beautifully in my opinion. Mohg still remains, in my opinion, among the most challenging bosses in the base game of Elden Ring, but for reasons that are perfectly fair and well-balanced in my eyes. In fact, he might be one of the most well-balanced bosses in the game. In Phase 1, most of Mohg's moves are melee attacks using his trident, and yes, I know it's called Mohgwyn's Sacred Spear, but I mean, come on guys, it's not a spear, it's a trident. His swings and thrusts with his trident are slower and more deliberate than a lot of boss attacks in Elden Ring, but at the same time, he's not super passive either, he's like a mix between the two. You still have to be careful with your dodge timing and pay attention to his attack patterns, however, you don't have to worry about constantly getting bombarded with attacks. His slower and more deliberate pace as well lets you recover your stamina in a very natural way, and I like that. While the hitboxes for his melee attacks are big, they seem to match up fairly well with the size of his weapon, meaning you won't have to worry about bullshit hitboxes in this fight. And while Mohg himself is also kind of big, he's not so big that you can constantly just abuse his size for the entire fight. Melee attacks aren't all that Mohg has at his disposal though, as he has a good many Blood Flame incantations he can use during the fight. The most common one that he tends to use from my experience is the Blood Flame Talons. When Mohg uses this attack, he claws at the air before a trail of red follows behind the claw marks, and which then erupt into fire. He can either claw head-on, or he can lunge from the side with the Blood Flame Talons and have it explode that way. This serves as an extra incentive to pay attention during the fight and punishes you if you don't dodge at the correct time. However, Blood Flame Talons isn't the only Blood Flame incantation that Mohg can use in Phase 1, as he also has Blood Boon at his disposal. When Mohg uses Blood Boon, he throws blood in any direction from his body, and when the blood hits the ground, it turns into Blood Flame that lingers for a few seconds. This attack forces you to mind your positioning as well and make sure you don't end up getting caught up in the Blood Flame. Mohg also has a second variation of this attack too, where he opens up a well up in the air, which then rains blood down onto the floor, which turns into Blood Flame just like with Blood Boon. This time though, it's in a fixed location and oftentimes is right in front of Mohg himself. This attack stops you from just endlessly mashing the attack button during the fight and forces you to have to attack him at the correct time. Mohg's also got one other Blood Flame incantation he can use during the first phase of the fight, which he only uses when he gets to half health or lower. It's called the Blood Boon Ritual. And well, it also results in one of my personal favorite second phase transitions without a cutscene in the game. In case you're confused on what just happened, pretty much what happens when Mohg initiates the Blood Boon Ritual is that he heals himself 3 times, which also procs blood loss on you. This sounds completely unfair and like complete bullshit, however, the game actually rewards you for exploration around the open world with this one. You see, back on the Altus Plateau, if you got the Purifying Crystal tier, you can actually use it during this fight to mitigate the effects of the blood loss. There's only one other boss in the entire game that rewards exploration in this style, and honestly, I really appreciate it a lot. In Phase 2, Mo gains a pair of new, feathery, gigantic wings which allow him to fly up above the arena and throw blood boons at you from above. And when he comes landing back down, he's also able to either swing his trident around in a circle or stab it into the ground. His speed and aggression are amped up by 11 in the second phase, and not just that, but all of his trident swings now have a trail of blood flame following them. Once the blood hits the ground from his trident, it'll create blood flame on the ground, which of course lingers for a few seconds. Now you don't just have to pay attention to what Moog is about to do, but what he's already done, and mind your positioning a lot. And if you linger in the blood flame too long, you'll have blood loss inflicted upon you. When you combine all of this together, you get a fight that feels extremely tense and adrenaline pumping, but also feels completely fair and perfectly balanced. Moog is just a fight that's aged absolutely beautifully, and he's an incredible boss that I've only come to appreciate more and more as time has gone on. I genuinely don't have a single negative word to say about this boss fight, and so I think he's more than deserving of being at number 7 on the list. Number 6, Rolana the Twin Moon Knight. A lot of people online have pointed this out already, but this boss is very clearly inspired by Pontiff Sullivan from Dark Souls 3, and you know what? I think I like this new one more. The most impressive thing about Rolana as well is that she managed to make it all the way up to number 6 on the list just purely from gameplay alone. I've got to admit, Rolana may have some fantastic gameplay, but From Software really did her dirty when it comes to the presentation of the fight. There's next to no lore given on Rolana in the game at all, and along with that, the dungeon before her, Castle Ensis, while being fun, isn't really all that memorable. And while Rolana's design does look admittedly cool in my opinion, the arena is pretty bland to say the least. They didn't even make the room before her arena some sort of opulent grand hall or anything like that. It's just a random side room inside of Castle Ensis. She's likely to be the second boss you encounter in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and she serves as a pretty good warning to upgrade your Shadow Tree Blessing level. Seriously, you do not want to face her too early. Rolana also serves as a great skill check for anyone trying to go through the main entrance into the Shadow Altus. When it comes to Rolana's speed, she might genuinely be the fastest boss in the entire game, and if she's not the fastest, then she's definitely up there. She's also got an absolutely insane level of aggression, even by Elden Ring boss standards. Rolana is so fast, aggressive, and agile that going for more than one hit at a time on her with something even as quick as a dagger is extremely risky. Not only can she just attack you as you're trying to attack her, but along with that, she can also just completely dodge your hit altogether. And trust me, Rolana has a lot of combos, and when she ends one combo, she goes straight away right into the next one. This means that you can't just immediately attack after dodging either. You have to wait for the end of her attack chain to be able to actually get a hit in. The way that Rolana's combos just chain together is absolutely perfect in my opinion. Every single attack feels like it leads smoothly into the next one. Some of her attacks have pretty different timings too, but the way it's handled in the fight is really good in my opinion. Some of her attacks are so quick that you only have about a second of reaction time, and some of them are delayed enough to catch you at the end of your roll if you reflexively dodge on instinct. It makes it so that you're punished for spam rolling while also at the same time making it hard to avoid spam rolling, being a true dodging skill check. Trying to cheese her with a shield won't work that great either because she will absolutely bash through your stamina bar. And if you try to parry her, then the timing is pretty difficult, so good luck. But even though the attack telegraphs are extremely short, they are definitely there and very noticeable, so you still have plenty of opportunity to see each attack coming. Her moveset is largely melee focused, however, she also does have access to magic attacks. She's able to summon small glint blades which hone in on the player, she's able to fire magical beams out of her sword, And she can also use the Carian Slicer spell, which has a lot of range in this instance, forcing you to have to dodge it, because running away will not work. Phase 1 is already considerably harder than most other bosses in the game, and will force you to have to adapt to the DLC's style of bosses. However, when Phase 2 begins, that's when things get real. This is where it becomes pretty clear that she gained inspiration from Pontiff Sullivan, as one of her swords becomes imbued with the power of fire and the other becomes imbued with magic. This, of course, makes her combos do more damage than they did before, but they also have minor side effects, such as her being able to shoot smaller sword beams. And aside from that, one of her combos gains flames that come after she's swung her sword around. Her melee combos also become even faster than they were in Phase 1, and her aggression gets amped up to the point where opportunities to actually fight back against her are pretty scarce. Her Glint Blade attack also gains a lot more Glint Blades as well that also hone in on you, making it even more dangerous than it was before. She also gains 2 new signature attacks associated with her. She'll always use one of these 2 attacks to open up the second phase of the fight, depending on the distance you are away from her. If you're further away from her, then she'll combo together a bunch of magic beams out of her sword. If you're up close with her, then she'll spin around with her other sword and create whirlwinds of fire around you. Both are extremely awesome in my opinion, especially the fire one, but the sword beam attack is much easier to deal with, so it's recommended that you get as far away from her as possible once she begins the second phase. But no amount of running is going to help you escape Rolana's new AoE attack. This AoE is comprised of 3 main damage sources. Rolana summons 2 twin moons and hovers up to the sky with them. She then drops each moon one after the other before slamming onto the ground herself. Each time one of them lands, you have to jump over the resulting shockwave, and the shockwaves travel throughout the entire arena, so there's no running away. The attack isn't really super hard to dodge now that I know how to avoid it, but it was pretty difficult my first time around. And let me tell you, jumping over each part of the AoE is just incredibly satisfying. Overall, when it comes to the amount of pure gameplay and fun, this boss is just perfect in my opinion. I just wish that maybe she was a bit better handled when it comes to the presentation of the fight, but I guess that's a bit of a nitpick more than anything. So overall, I think Rolana deserves to be given her flowers as the number 6 boss on this list. This next boss right here might genuinely have some of the best build-up to it in the entire game. First, you enter into the Abyssal Woods region, which is a region scorched by the Frenzied Flame. Then eventually you end up finding a Legacy Dungeon, which is an abandoned mansion deep within the woods. And throughout the entire Legacy Dungeon, you hear this character speaking to you, warning you to leave while you can. And then at the end of the mansion, you finally find him.
The depths of your foolishness! Enough. I have endured more than enough. I ask you forgive me, dearest Nanaya.
Yeah, talk about an unforgettable introduction, huh? The art direction and atmosphere of the fight against Midra is easily some of the absolute best in all of Elden Ring, period. It really feels like you're fighting against something wielding the full power of the Frenzied Flame, like you're going up against some sort of all-powerful, evil, malevolent force that you have to eliminate. The actual gameplay of the fight isn't super off-the-walls batshit crazy like a lot of other bosses, but you know what? I'm completely okay with that. His melee attacks mainly consist of pretty traditional, slow, graceful swings with his weapon. However, there's a little bit of a twist on it. Midra moves pretty unnaturally during the fight, but not exactly in the way you might think. He doesn't move around like some sort of unhinged maniac, he moves around very slowly and deliberately, almost like he's some sort of puppet or marionette. This actually amplifies the difficulty of the fight a little bit for me because it can be sometimes a little hard to not accidentally dodge too early with an attack. There's even some attacks where Midra seems to literally float through the air before attacking you. And with all of his animations, it's as if the Frenzied Flame replacing his head is the center of his body and the center of control. This, for me, adds a lot to the atmosphere of the fight and makes the Frenzied Flame, as well as Midra himself, even more creepy and unsettling. And of course, in addition to his large greatsword, Midra has a small dagger at his side as well, which is a little bit faster than his greatsword. And yet, despite that, both weapons still feel like he's attacking with them in slow motion. I just don't know how else to describe it. Even with the unnerving nature of a lot of his attacks, the graceful way Midra moves in the fight is almost really pretty in a way, especially his move where he basically becomes a Beyblade. But as you should know by now, of course Midra's moveset isn't just melee attacks. Midra has melee as well as ranged attacks revolving around the Frenzied Flame. In Phase 1, he mainly has attacks where he spews Frenzied Flame at you from his head. Not only does the Frenzied Flame do damage once it hits you, but it'll also build up the Madness status effect. If you don't know how the Madness status effect, once it fully builds up, it'll take off a chunk of your max HP. But not only will it do that, but it'll also lock you in place for a few seconds until you're able to move again. This means that if you end up getting madness inflicted on you during the fight with Midra, not only will you have been hit by that attack, but you'll also be guaranteed to be hit by the next one. And there's another move you've got to watch out for where Midra dashes across the room, leaving a trail of Frenzied Flame behind him. The attack comes out much faster than most other moves in his arsenal, so it's something you've got to be especially careful of. He's also got another special melee attack where he thrusts with the greatsword and then the barbs of his greatsword extend outwards before coming back in. This sounds like a lot to deal with, and it kind of is. However, you're granted very generous opportunities to heal yourself back up as well as sneak some hits in on the boss. Midra is slower and much less aggressive than most bosses in the DLC as well, which makes the fight feel pretty balanced. Even if Midra is one of the easier bosses in the DLC, the fight still feels tense and fun, and I really like that. The first phase is pretty much like a slow warm-up for what's about to happen, because let me tell you, Phase 2's introduction is brutal. Yeah, I really don't think I need to explain why Phase 2 opening up with a massive AoE that covers practically the whole arena, which deals a massive chunk of damage, is pretty brutal. Yeah, Phase 2 is where the stakes of the fight become absolutely apparent to the player. This isn't just you beating a bad guy, you've gotta kill Midra before he leaves the arena and ends the world. And with the Phase 2 opening AoE, the process of the Frenzied Flame devouring the world already begins with the drapes and curtains in the arena starting to catch fire. This raises the intensity of the fight by a lot and makes it very clear to the player that failure is not an option. You have to win. There is no other choice. And hey, if you're going for the Frenzied Flame ending yourself, then Midra is some competition that you've got to kill off beforehand. Either way though, Phase 2 is definitely much more intense and much more difficult than Phase 1, as not only does Midra become faster and more aggressive than in Phase 1, but most of his regular sword swings now have Frenzied Flame trails following after them. Not only does this encourage you to stay up close and personal with Midra, but it also adds extra punishment for if you fail to dodge one of his attacks. He also has another new attack where he leaps up into the air and then jumps back down and impales you with his sword. He has new Frenzied Flame attacks as well, such as one similar to the Flame of the Fell God attack from the Fire Giant fight where he creates a raging ball of Frenzied Flame that then explodes, as well as another attack where he spews a massive laser of it at you. Midra's fight has a lot going for it. It's got fantastic presentation, some great music, some incredible atmosphere, as well as some amazing gameplay to back it up. So you know what? I think Midra is a pretty amazing boss, so I think he deserves number 5 on the list. And at number 4, we've got Malekith the Black Blade. Malekith is the main boss of Crumbling Farum Azula, which is the final legacy dungeon of the base game. And not only does he manage to be the most difficult mandatory boss in the game, but also my personal favorite boss fight outside of the DLC. In Phase 1, though, you don't fight against Malekith in his true form, instead you fight his alter ego, Gurranq the Beast Clergyman, who is a character you encounter throughout the game. In Phase 1, the fight is already harder than most bosses in the game. The Beast Clergyman moves around extremely fast and frantically like an animal. The melee attacks with its blade are extremely quick and have very quick wind-ups, meaning you have practically no reaction time. This forces you to stay on your toes throughout the entirety of the fight, and plus the Beast Clergyman moves around a lot, so you can't really abuse its size. Its ranged attacks mainly consist of different bestial incantations that you can actually get from him earlier in the game. The first of which is where he grabs the earth and hurls it up before it falls back down, the second is where he slings a rock at you, the third is where he puts his claw in the ground and then lifts it up, sending a bunch of claw markings across the ground, and the third is when he throws a bunch of sharper rocks in a fan-like pattern. The pauses he takes during the fight as well are incredibly brief compared to most bosses, meaning that you can't just spam the attack button over and over again. It teaches the player that instead of just attacking as soon as they dodge, they have to space out their attacks. They have to dodge the full combo and then hit the attack button and dodge the next combo and repeat the process instead of just attacking every time they dodge. I don't really have a huge amount to say about the first phase, and while I don't think it's incredible, I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people say. In fact, I still find it to be quite fun. Although I will admit, I do really suck at it. The thing that might initially strike you as weird about this boss is the fact that you came to Crumbling Farum Azula to seek out the Rune of Death and release it. It's said that Malekith the Black Blade, who was Marika's loyal shadow, had the power of destined death. But once you reach the arena, the Beast Clergyman says that he will not have destined death stolen from him again. This should already raise some suspicions about the true identity of Gurranq, but once you manage to best him in Phase 1, he gives up on his persona and shows his true identity. And this cutscene alone is absolutely incredible, so I'll let it play for you.
O death, blade once more.
Yeah, Phase 2 is where Malekith truly becomes one of the hardest bosses in the game, where the true boss fight really begins, and along with that, where Malekith becomes worthy of Legendary tier. The atmosphere and soundtrack of the second phase are absolutely top tier in my opinion, because by this point, Malekith knows what you're here for. He knows that you're here to kill him and steal the Rune of Death from him, and he knows that if he fails at any point, then Radagon and by extension Marika will die. So now it's not just a simple boss fight against the Beast Clergyman anymore. This is Malekith throwing absolutely everything he has at you to try and stop you. Everything comes together to make this genuinely feel like an epic and climactic boss fight. And hell, at some points Malekith feels even more like a final boss than Radagon and the Elden Beast. Malekith becomes much more predictable in Phase 2, but also deceptively more difficult at the same time. He has longer windups to his attacks, however his attacks also hit harder, and along with that, his attacks apply an effect to you called Destined Death. Destined Death works similarly to the Black Flame effect from the Godskin bosses, but there's an additional little twist to it. Instead of just sapping away some extra health once you get hit, it also temporarily limits your max HP. This means that after you get hit, you won't be able to fully heal yourself back up to your max HP for a time. This sounds like it would be super unfair, however, as I said, the effect only lasts for a limited amount of time, and once it runs out, your HP is restored. Malekith also does have one ranged attack, where he basically leaps in the air and then swings his blade while in midair, which then fires a beam of Destined Death at you. The attack isn't super difficult to avoid, but man, it looks cool. It looks like it's straight out of an anime. And not just that, but he can also combo several of these swings together. And once he combos these together, he'll usually end the combo with one of a few attacks. The first is him spinning around rapidly on the ground. The second is him plunging his blade into the ground, which creates an explosion before he jumps backwards and keeps attacking. And the third is where he stabs his weapon into the ground, which then causes a little bit of Destined Death to erupt from the earth around it. Malekith's aggression level during Phase 2 is absolutely insane and practically unmatched by any other boss in the game. You can almost feel the desperation in a lot of his attacks, and I just really like that. It shows that while you can't just be passive, you can't get overly aggressive and overconfident either. Your windows to be able to successfully attack him are extremely tight, but they are there and they are enough for you to be able to do it. Malekith's most dangerous attack is probably the one where he swings his blade around, then stabs it into the ground, which then causes a flurry of Destined Death blades to appear. The attack comes out extremely quick and you have very little time to react to it. It's got a big hitbox and it does a lot of damage. However, there is actually a way to counter it. If you have the Blasphemous Claw item and you time it just right, you're actually able to completely deflect the attack. I haven't really managed to get the timing down, however, since there is a way to counter the attack, I don't really think it's unfair. And in order to balance out the insane difficulty of the fight further, Malekith always starts at half health during Phase 2, and along with this, Malekith doesn't have a huge amount of health. And let me tell you, getting the final hit on him is just, it is so satisfying. And so, because of everything I've said here, I believe that Malekith is more than deserving of Legendary tier and the number 4 spot on this list. Okay, hi, Editor Gussie just popping in for a brief moment to say that, this next boss here, as I was in the process of making this video, the next boss on this list actually got nerfed, so I had to go back and refight it again. It didn't really change my placement of it on the list at all, but if there's any inconsistencies in the footage, it's because I had to record a bunch of new footage. So, yeah, onto the actual entry. Okay, so if any of you guys watching this video right now still haven't played the DLC for yourself and you don't want it spoiled, then, well, first of all, why are you still watching this video? And second of all, this is your cue to leave right now. This is your last warning, okay? This here is by far the biggest DLC spoiler in the video. But anyways, here we go. The confrontation that most of the DLC has ultimately been leading towards. The final battle of the most ambitious DLC From Software has made to date. And let me tell you, this intro cutscene was definitely not something I expected.
My loyal blade and champion of the festival. Both your deeds will ever be praised in song. Now, the vow will be honored, and my lord brother's soul will return, so that he may be my consort.
Let's be real for a second, as soon as I mentioned the spoilers part, you probably knew which boss this was going to be. Yeah, back at Star Scourge Radahn's segment on the list, when I said that this wouldn't be the last time we'd see Radahn on the list, this boss is what I was talking about. And this time, we're basically fighting Radahn at the absolute strongest he's ever been. Although, maybe that's debatable, seeing as it's his soul inhabiting the body of Mohg after we kill him and he kinda got molested in the process, but let's not think too deep about that. A lot of people seem to have very mixed opinions on Radahn being the final boss of the DLC, largely from a story perspective, but for me, I'm okay with it. A lot of people may also not like this boss from a gameplay standpoint, and if you're one of those people, then look, I understand. This boss isn't really for everybody. As someone who managed to actually beat Promised Consort Radahn before he got nerfed, I can confidently say that even post-nerf, Promised Consort Radahn remains not only the hardest Elden Ring boss, the hardest From Software boss, but probably the hardest boss I've fought in any game in recent memory. First, there's his moveset, which while being limited is still pretty difficult to deal with. Radahn is a mostly melee-focused boss, however his swords have a really long reach to them. Not just that either, but they deal a lot of damage if you actually get hit by them, so it's both difficult to avoid them and punishing if you get hit. His moves are also almost completely different from his fight as Star Scourge Radahn earlier in the game. The only one kind of similar to his Star Scourge Radahn fight is when he spins around with his swords, but even then it's not super obvious. Most of Radahn's melee attacks, while not exactly being very fast and still being kinda slow, are faster than a boss of his size would suggest. And the way he combos together attacks with his swords is actually designed to punish you for getting too far away from him and for dodging backwards. It exploits one of the most instinctual, panicky acts from a player, and I really like that. It makes it so that you really do have to pay attention during this fight, and you can't just rely on instinct. And if you manage to actually create a good bit of distance between yourself and Radahn, then he'll try to close that distance, either with his attack, which acts very similarly to the Lion's Claw Ash of War, or by sucking you in with gravity magic. Once Radahn pulls you in, he follows it up in one of two ways. The first is by doing a combo where he throws you up in the air and then smacks you back down onto the ground, which can be a guaranteed death if you're low enough on health, or by using his Gravity Well attack, which creates a well of, you guessed it, gravity magic around him which you've got to run away from. Both can be extremely dangerous if you're caught unprepared, so when he starts trying to pull you in, just roll at the correct time. He can also close the distance by basically becoming a corkscrew and flying at you using gravity magic. I'll be honest, I'm kinda sad that the latest nerf made him not do this anymore when you enter the arena, because I always thought it was a really cool introduction. Another gravity magic attack he has at his disposal is where he flies up above the arena and then shoots giant rocks at you. He does this attack quite often, and it has two parts basically: the drag from his swords as he goes flying up, and the actual boulders. Along with all of this, Radahn also has access to a Blood Flame incantation with his sword. Normally I would find it to be quite random, but given that he's literally inside Mohg's body, I think it makes enough sense. Other than that, all of Radahn's other attacks are pretty alright in my book. I used to really dislike his cross slash attack because it had basically no wind-up to it, but thankfully this got fixed in the latest patch and now it's much more manageable. And then, of course, we cannot forget about how Phase 2 begins.
Lord brother. At long last you are returned. Tarnished one. Aspiring lord of the old order. If you have known sin, if you grieve for this world, then yield the path forward to us. To I, Nicola, and my promised consort, Radahn.
Yeah, Phase 2 is where this fight truly becomes as incredible as it is, as well as where it becomes the hardest fight in the game. First off, just look at this presentation, man. It is absolutely perfect in my opinion. They managed to somehow nail the final boss vibe of this fight just as much as with the Elden Beast, and that is saying something. Many of Radahn's combos remain pretty much the same as they were in Phase 1, but now there's a twist to his melee attacks. Now all of them have the holy light of Miquella following after the edges of his swords. This additionally punishes you if you're too far away from Radahn, and on top of this, it also makes it so that you have to dodge at the correct time or you'll get hit with both attacks. This turns basically all of Radahn's melee attacks into potential one-shots, even with max Shadow Tree Blessing. A lot of his magic attacks also now have a new follow-up to them where he sends clones after you, similar to the fight with Melania. He also gains a new grab attack, which is one of the most unique in the entire game. Basically, if you get grabbed twice by him, it's an instant kill, but it doesn't give you a screen that says you died. Instead, the screen you get says that your heart was stolen, which is pretty weird. He can also throw out rings of Miquella from his swords, although they're fairly easy to avoid from my experience. He has a new AoE attack which covers almost the entire arena and you have to run away from as soon as the animation begins or you'll basically be screwed. There's a new combo he has where he basically spins and twists around with his swords before eventually leaping up into the air and plummeting back down, which sends the light of Miquella throughout the whole arena. On top of this as well, he's got a new attack called the Lightspeed Slash, where he basically zips across the arena leaving light behind him. And then of course, towards the end of the fight, he jumps up into the skybox, disappears, only to come crashing down in a giant light meteor which has 3 different hits to it. All of this can be a lot to handle and can be pretty overwhelming, but let me tell you, it is incredibly satisfying once you finally get the final hit and beat the boss. You actually feel like a god the first time you do it, and that feeling never goes away. And then of course, there's the incredible soundtrack of the fight that's been playing the entire segment. I don't even think I have to isolate it, it's just incredible. And so, for every reason that I've listed, I think that Promised Consort Radahn deserves the number 3 spot on the list. Okay, so this boss here doesn't actually have an official cutscene, but there is some really awesome NPC dialogue, so here you go.
Curse you, Baal! I hereby vow you will rue this day. Behold, a true great warrior, and I, Egon. Your fears made flesh. Solid of scale you might be, foul dragon. But I will riddle with holes your rotten hide. With a hail of harpoons! With every last drop of my being!
Yeah, seriously, Richard Lintern absolutely killed it with the voice acting here, man. But anyway, here at number 2, we've got Baal the Dread. When it comes to the build-up for a boss fight, Baal is an absolute masterclass in this category. Literally the entire open world region leading up to him, the Jagged Peak, is dedicated to hyping you up for this fight. Baal doesn't have a super huge amount of lore to him other than him nearly killing Placidusax, but I don't really mind this. Even based on pure gameplay alone, Bale is probably the best From Software has ever made when it comes to dragons. Bale's got a lot of attacks that you'd expect from a dragon, such as the usual Fire Breath, except this time Bale's Fire Breath is actually mixed in with lightning as well. He's able to leap up off the ground and then slam back down, causing an explosion of lightning flame. He can of course swipe his wings at you. He's got a tail swipe which he can literally combo together into several attack chains. Bale has one attack where he actually lunges forth and tries to grab you in his mouth, and then after he grabs you, he thrashes you around for a little bit before throwing you away. For me, this attack is just really, really difficult to avoid. I don't even know what it is. Something about the delay of when he rears his head back just gets me. And upon taking a look at Bale, you might have noticed that he's pretty severely injured, with his wings being shredded apart and one of his legs being reduced to a stump. However, Bale is actually able to use this to his advantage. You see, his right wing has its bone exposed, but he uses that bone as a makeshift spear during the fight. I don't even know what to say about that, like, seriously, that is just so damn badass. In fact, Bale himself is extremely badass in my opinion. He straight up looks like something out of Doom but put in a medieval fantasy setting. Bale's also got an attack where he lets out a roar which summons lightning which trails after the player and you have to run instead of dodge away from it. As you can tell, Bale's got a really well made and versatile moveset, and along with that, the way of attacking him is made pretty clear. Because of Bale's hunched over posture that he has, it's really difficult getting between his legs or underneath his body. However, when you lock onto him, you'll notice that it targets his head. And along with this, Bale's head is pretty close to the ground compared to the rest of his body. So instead of just constantly wailing away at one of his sides or behind him, you've got to wait for his head to come closer to the ground and then strike at his head. However, even if you go for his head, it's still quite dangerous as Bale is insanely aggressive, especially for a dragon. Windows to heal in this fight are absolutely minimal, and along with that, your windows to attack are very short. Along with everything else about how the fight plays out, this just comes together to make it so that hesitation is really defeat with this fight. You've gotta come in and be confident when you're fighting Bale, because if you hesitate for even a second, you're probably gonna end up dead. You won't have to worry as much about his attack speed, because at least for me, Bale is actually kind of slow compared to a lot of bosses in the game. However, he makes up for this with the fact that his attacks hit hard. I will say though, being able to summon Egon for this fight makes it significantly easier, and along with that, I think it helps improve the fight a little bit. Egon not only serves as a fantastic hype man with his absolutely incredible voice acting, but he also helps you out as well. Egon isn't great at dealing damage to Bale, but what makes him good as an NPC summon is the fact that he can actually distract Bale for a brief moment. This makes it so that you're actually able to heal yourself back up again when Bale is distracted with Egon, and I really appreciate that. It also allows you to sneak a few hits in on Bale because, well, he's got an absolutely massive health bar. Already in Phase 1, Bale has proven to be a fantastic boss fight. And gameplay aside, even just in Phase 1, Bale has some of the best presentation out of any boss in the game. Whether it be the arena, a field of red flowers at the summit of the jagged peak with stormy red lightning skies, the incredible build-up to this fight, the great music in the background, Egon's voice acting, and just the design of Bale itself, this really does feel like a cinematic and epic showdown with the Tyrant Drake. But of course, Phase 1 isn't all that this fight consists of, and this boss has one of the best second phase transitions of the game, seriously. It may not have a cutscene, but man, his transition into Phase 2 is just awesome. Yeah, I don't even think I have to explain what makes that second phase transition so cool. The attack he always opens up with, Bale's Tyranny, is just the perfect introduction. Phase 2 is also where the presentation goes from being some of the best presentation in all of Elden Ring to the absolute best in my opinion. Seriously, this has by far the best spectacle of any boss in the game. And as you are also able to see, Bale gains the ability to summon a pair of spectral wings which he can use during the fight. He can use them to either jump up even higher and then slam back down on you, or he can use them to fly around the arena and either shoot projectiles at you or breathe fire lightning at you. His attacks with his bone spear thing also get modified in Phase 2. Whenever he swings his bone around in Phase 2, lightning now strikes the ground in the path that it traveled. Every time he strikes the ground too, lightning strikes around the area where he hit. Bale's small explosions of lightning that he was able to summon now also turn into giant nukes similar to the fight with Placidusax. His tail swipe also now has a new variant where he does a full 360-degree spin around. His aggression is amped up even more as well, and his attacks hit even harder than they did in Phase 1. And then of course there's the absolute top tier OST that plays in Phase 2. Just take a listen to this segment. The developers seriously knocked it out of the park with everything that has to do with Bale. Seriously, this boss fight is just incredible. Bale is more than deserving of being recognized as the best dragon boss FromSoft has ever made, in my opinion. And when it comes to Elden Ring bosses, he's second only to one other boss in the game. And well, I doubt that many of you will really be surprised as to who that boss is. The number 1 spot on today's list takes place in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and it was hyped up a lot by the trailers for the DLC. The character is arguably the star of the entire DLC, and he's the closest thing to a main antagonist for the DLC outside of Mikola, of course. The war waged against the Hornsent that basically led them to extinction, all of the destruction and devastation throughout the Realm of Shadow, almost all of it is riddled with this character's fingerprints. Their Shadowkeep looms over the entirety of the Realm of Shadow and towers over everything except for the Shadow Tree itself. And after we finally reach the top of the Shadowkeep, and we finally enter into the chamber of this boss, we get to face off against them for ourselves. This is a boss that was hyped up by the trailers of the DLC, and it's been hyped up for basically the entire DLC up to this point as well. So trust me when I say, this cutscene right here sent chills down my spine.
Mongrel intruder. That tarnished, it seemeth. Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light? Yet, my purpose standeth unchanged. Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death. In the embrace of Mesmer's flame.
That's right. Right here at number 1, we have none other than Mesmer the Impaler. This is it, the showdown with the eldest of all the demigods who committed genocide against the Hornsent, destroyed all of their cities, and led his armies into a war without grace or honor. But little did I realize on my first playthrough that I would genuinely come to really respect Mesmer after learning more about him. Mesmer has committed absolutely monstrous acts, but he has more depth to him than just that. Mesmer isn't some bloodthirsty tyrant hell-bent on keeping power in the realm of shadow. He didn't enact his crusade out of some sort of blind hatred for the Hornsent. He waged his genocidal war against them because of what they did to the shamans. The shamans were the people that Mesmer's mother, Queen Marika, was born into. The Hornsent committed absolutely horrible atrocities against them, capturing them from their village, torturing them, molding them together, and stuffing them inside of jars and rituals to become saints. When Marika ascended to godhood, she wanted vengeance against the Hornsent for what happened to her people, and it just so happened that her eldest son, Mesmer, was more than willing to go along with her plan. Only once Mesmer finally established his control over the realm of shadow and defeated basically all of the Hornsent, he was basically left there to fend for himself. Marika never returned Mesmer back home, and Mesmer's awaited in his dark throne room waiting for her to bring him back, to give him a single sign, to say literally anything to him, and that never ended up happening. Mesmer's remained here. Mesmer's still kept his army at his side. He just wants to go back home. He wants this crusade to be over, and he's the one who started it. And this here is perfectly conveyed to us during the fight, in my opinion. Mesmer, you see, is pretty depressed. He talks with a hint of boredom and emotionlessness, like he just doesn't care anymore. Every time he kills us in Phase 1, which, believe me, will happen a good bit, his post-battle dialogue just sounds completely lifeless and rehearsed. It's almost like this exact scenario has happened time after time, like his dialogue is stuff he's already said to countless people before who rose up against him, like it's an order that he's been following the entire time he's been in the realm of shadow for millennia. He's just tired of it all. As you can tell right here, I absolutely adore Mesmer's lore, and I absolutely love him as a character. He might genuinely be my favorite character in all of Elden Ring. But even lore aside, Mesmer's gameplay alone is more than enough to solidify him as being among the top 3 bosses in the game. Let's start with his aggression level. For me, it's absolutely perfect. He's just aggressive enough to feel like an actual threat while also not being too aggressive to the point where it feels overboard. Mesmer is a pretty fast boss, however he's not so fast that it's nearly impossible to see any of his attacks coming. The telegraphs for his attacks, while sometimes being on the quicker side, are still very noticeable and you can still tell that he's about to start up an attack. Mesmer has a good many combos that he'll use one after the other during the fight, however there's one thing he does very consistently. After he's finished an attack combo, he'll pause for a very brief amount of time before starting the next one. While this window is extremely short, it's just enough time for you to either heal yourself or attack Mesmer. The delays on Mesmer's attacks are just enough to make it so that spam rolling isn't really possible in the fight. However, the delays are still short enough to where it doesn't ruin the pacing of the fight or make it feel any slower. Mesmer's moveset in Phase 1 is mostly melee attacks with his spear, and a lot of them have fire that follow after the tip of his spear and extend outward. The way it's set up is designed similarly to the second phase of Promise Consort Radahn, where it punishes you for rolling backwards. However, here it's much more finely tuned. The fire actually matches the hitbox of the spear, and along with that, the fire shoots backwards at just enough of a delay from the initial swing to where it'll catch you at the end of your roll if you roll backwards. This encourages the player to dodge inwards to a lot of Mesmer's attacks and to stay up close and personal with him, but in a way that feels natural. Most of Mesmer's spear attacks consist of pretty standard thrusts with his spear, some spear swings, and also some flipping around with fire following after the spear. He's also able to jump around the arena while attacking with his spear as well, giving him a good bit of agility. Most attacks are pretty straightforward to be able to dodge, but there's this one attack where he drags his spear along the ground before thrusting it upwards that I always have trouble avoiding for some reason. I can't even really describe what about it makes it so hard to avoid, it just kind of is. Mesmer also can, of course, use fire spells to his advantage. He's able to summon fireballs, which chase after the player. He can use the Mesmer's Orb incantation, which you have to dodge twice. And he's also got a grab attack, which is one of the most devastating grabs in the game. The first part of the attack is when he actually grabs you, which deals a little bit of damage. Then he impales you on his spear, then sets you on fire, and then throws you away. This attack deals a lot of damage, and even on higher Shadow Tree Blessing levels, it can still one-shot you. He can leap up in the air and throw his spear at you from a distance, and on top of all of this, he's able to spin around and create fire from his spear. And then, of course, Mesmer also has his own signature special attack at his disposal. The attack's called Mesmer's Assault, and it functions very similarly to the Waterfowl dance from Melania's fight. Basically, Mesmer swings his spear and fire comes out of it as he jumps backwards. Then he does a bunch of rapid thrusts with his spear, before eventually stabbing it into the ground and causing a bunch of spears to appear out of the ground. The attack does an insane amount of damage, and it's pretty dangerous, but the thing about it is that it's completely fair to dodge. The telegraph for it is really good, and along with that, there's a short delay between each part of the attack. Furthermore, the hitboxes are actually really good, they function completely well. Already in Phase 1, Mesmer has the best aggression level, the best moveset, and along with this, some of the best gameplay out of any boss in the game. But keep in mind, this is just Phase 1. You see, something I've neglected to mention until now is that Mesmer was born cursed. He was cursed with an abyssal, malevolent snake that writhed within him, one that threatened to devour him from the inside. Marika replaced his one and seemingly only eye with her own seal of grace to lock away the serpent. Mesmer keeps the seal of grace in his eye socket, but once we manage to best him in battle, he finally can't take it anymore. And that's when his true power is finally let loose.
Not suffer. A lord devoid of light. No, mother. Forgive me.
thou be taken in the jaws of the abyssal serpent, shorn of light.
Yeah, that might genuinely be one of the most disturbing cutscenes in the entire game for me. In Phase 2, Mesmer goes from just being Mesmer the Impaler to base Serpent Mesmer, and you can tell from his design just how much of a toll the Abyssal Serpent has truly taken on him. Phase 2 is a bit slower paced and more predictable, but I honestly like it just as much as Phase 1. Mesmer still has access to basically all of his moves from the first phase, however he becomes slower and more awkward with the timing, almost like he's struggling to keep control over himself. He also gains a brand new ability. This time Mesmer is able to actually summon giant serpents out of portals to attack you, as well as change into a giant serpent himself. These snakes are pretty large and aren't all that fast, but sometimes they can be a bit tricky to avoid. But as long as you get your timing correct, you should be all good. And once you manage to dodge it, Mesmer is basically open to free attacks. Mesmer also has one attack where he combos a bunch of snake attacks together, and it ends off either with his signature Mesmer's Assault attack, or with a giant Mesmer's orb from his snake mouth. Somehow Phase 2 manages to be just as difficult as Phase 1 for me, if not even more so. But for reasons that are completely fair and balanced, this really feels like a cinematic confrontation and a showdown. It really feels epic and powerful and climactic, and I just love it. While in my opinion nothing in this game competes with the spectacle offered by Phase 2 of Bale the Dread, base Serpent Mesmer is close. And then once you manage to kill Mesmer, his final words are just, man.
America, a curse upon thee.
Seeing Mesmer finally curse his mother with his dying breath was both satisfying, but at the same time genuinely heartbreaking. Even with the awful thing Mesmer's done, he's the abandoned child of a mother who didn't want him. He was used and left to die and never got to return home. He was born with a curse he had no control over. Mesmer is a villain, but at the same time, he's a victim in his own right. He deserved better than what he was handed, and that's just tragic. The music in Phase 2 reflects this as well, and it might just genuinely be one of my favorite tracks in the entire game, if not my favorite. The music perfectly encapsulates the sadness and desperation of Mesmer in Phase 2, and I just love it. If I could describe Mesmer's boss fight with just one word, it would be flawless. Mesmer's moveset is absolutely perfect. His health bar is incredibly well designed. His visual design is great, his lore is fantastic, the music is amazing, and the gameplay is the best out of any boss in Elden Ring. Mesmer isn't just my favorite Elden Ring boss, but I think he might genuinely be tied with Slave Knight Gale for the best boss out of any game I've ever played, period. That is how much I adore this fight. Mesmer the Impaler is a masterpiece of a boss fight, and I am saying this unironically. And because of everything I've said, Mesmer deserves his throne as being the #1 best boss in Elden Ring, and possibly in gaming as a whole. Well, in order to end off this very long, very difficult to create list, I'm gonna give my final thoughts. Elden Ring is a game that I don't really think is perfect by any means, however, it might genuinely have overtaken Bloodborne as being my favorite game of all time. Obviously, not every single boss in Elden Ring is perfect, but a lot of them are absolutely incredible. Elden Ring has one of the best boss rosters across the Souls series, period, and I absolutely love most of the bosses in this game. But anyways, I've finally done it. I've ranked every single Elden Ring boss. This took an extremely long time and a lot of effort, and I feel like I'm about to crash into bed now. I'm not sure when my next video is going to be made, but I need to sleep. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one whenever it comes out, and, peace.